The marble floors of the Sterling penthouse were imported directly from Italy, carefully selected, to match the icy perfection of the life my husband Richard insisted we project. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, I felt nothing but cold. It was 7:00 a.m. on a Tuesday. The city below was alive, breathing fighting. Up here in this $40 million cage, there was only silence. I held my phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over the send button. Just an hour earlier, unable to sleep, I had gone down to the lobby for a coffee. That was when I saw him. Marcus Hayes. He was the building's head of maintenance, a tall black man with broad shoulders, wearing a faded blue utility shirt with his name stitched over the pocket. He didn't notice me stepping out of the elevator. His complete attention was focused on the little girl sitting on a velvet bench, his daughter Maya. She was maybe 7, her small feet dangling over the edge holding a scuffed pink backpack. Marcus was kneeling on the polished floor, his calloused hands moving with shocking gentleness as he tied her shoelaces. You got your science project in there, baby girl." His voice was a low, warm rumble that seemed to thaw the sterile air of the lobby. "Yes, Daddy, I made sure it didn't get crushed," Maya replied, her dark eyes looking at him with absolute unwavering trust. Marcus smiled a quiet, tired smile that held more genuine love than I had experienced in 8 years of marriage. He kissed her forehead, adjusted her collar, and stood up, carrying the weight of the world with a quiet, undeniable dignity. I had stood there, an invisible ghost in a $1,000 silk coat, feeling a sudden sharp ache in my chest. That was what a protector looked like. That was what family felt like. Now, back in my penthouse, the memory of Marcus and his daughter made the sterile perfection of my living room feel suffocating. I looked at the text message I had crafted with the help of my private financial advisor. It was a perfect replica of an automated bank alert. Asterisk alert, joint account, ending in 8,842. Available balance $0. Severe margin call executed. All linked assets frozen pending federal review. Please contact your wealth manager immediately. For months, the signs had been there. The hushed phone calls Richard took on the balcony. The sudden business trips to Miami that never appeared on his corporate itinerary. The scent of a perfume that certainly wasn't mine, lingering on his tailored suits. But worst of all was the way he looked at me, or rather, the way he stopped looking at me. I was no longer a wife to Richard Sterling. I was a portfolio. I was the heir to the Vance shipping fortune, a key that opened doors to the elite social circles he so desperately craved. He managed our wealth, keeping me isolated, assuring me that high finance was too stressful for me to handle. I needed to know the truth. I needed to know if the man sleeping in the master bedroom loved Eleanor the woman or Eleanor the bank account. I took a deep breath, the air catching slightly in my throat, and pressed send. The text didn't go to my phone. It was sent directly to Richard's private number, mimicking the bank's automated system perfectly. I placed my phone on the kitchen island, poured myself a glass of iced water, and waited. The silence in the penthouse stretched thick and heavy. 1 minute passed, then 2. From down the hallway, the faint vibration of a phone buzzing against a mahogany nightstand echoed. I gripped the edge of the marble counter, my knuckles turning white. I heard the rustle of Egyptian cotton sheets being thrown back, a heavy thud of footsteps. Then the bedroom door flew open. Richard didn't walk into the kitchen. He stormed in. His hair was disheveled, his eyes wide and frantic, staring at the screen of his phone as if it had just bitten him. He didn't even register I was standing there until he nearly bumped into the island. "Richard," I asked, keeping my voice soft-laced with feigned confusion. "Is everything okay? You're pale." He looked up, his eyes darting wildly. There was no concern in his gaze. There was no panic for our asterisk well-being. There was only raw, unadulterated self-preservation. "Did you see this?" he demanded, his voice cracking, shoving the screen toward my face. "Did you get an alert?" I widened my eyes, playing the part he had assigned me, for years the naive, sheltered wife. "Alert, no. Let me check." I picked up my phone and opened a fake secondary email my advisor had set up. I let out a staged gasp, dropping my hand to my mouth. "Oh my God. Richard. It says the accounts are frozen. It says the balance is 0. The margin call, Did something happen with the hedge fund? I stepped toward him, reaching out to touch his arm, seeking the comfort a husband should provide when the world is collapsing. Richard, what does this mean? Are we bankrupt? I expected him to pull me into a hug. I expected him to say, "Don't worry, Ellie, I'll fix this. We have each other ... Instead, Richard flinched. He physically recoiled from my touch, taking a large step back, as if my sudden lack of wealth was a contagious disease. "Don't touch me," he hissed, the smooth, polished veneer of the society gentleman shattering in an instant. His face twisted into a sneer I had never seen before. "Our we bankrupt no Eleanor. You are bankrupt. Your idiot grandfather's outdated trust structure finally collapsed just like I warned you it would." The cruelty in his voice hit me like a physical blow. My breath hitched, my chest tightening as the reality of his reaction began to sink in. "Richard, what are you saying we can rebuild? We'll downsize. Downsize." He let out a harsh, barking laugh that echoed terribly against the high ceilings. "Do I look like a man who downsizes Eleanor? Do I look like someone who clips coupons and flies coach?" He turned his back on me, marching toward the walk-in closet. The sheer speed of his abandonment left me paralyzed. He was leaving. In less than 3 minutes of believing the money was gone, Richard Sterling was already packing. I followed him into the master suite, my bare feet silent against the plush wool rugs. Richard's frantic movements were precise, practiced. He wasn't packing essentials. He was packing valuables. I watched paralyzed as he tossed his collection of Patek Philippe watches into a velvet-lined case, followed by custom-tailored suits and cashmere sweaters. "Richard," I whispered, the sound barely carrying over the harsh zip of garment bags. 8 years. You're leaving after 8 years because of a bank error." He stopped, a pair of platinum cufflinks clutched in his fist. He turned to me, and the look of sheer contempt on his face made my blood run cold. The handsome, charming facade he had worn for nearly a decade vanished, replaced by the cold calculation of a predator assessing a dead end. "Error." He spat the word, his upper lip curling. "I've been warning you about your family's outdated portfolio for months. I knew this ship was going to sink. I just didn't expect it to go down this morning." "But we are married," I pleaded, stepping forward, desperate to find a trace of the man I thought I knew. "In sickness and in health. For richer, for poorer." "Oh, spare me the poetry, Eleanor," he snapped, throwing the cufflinks into his leather travel case. "I am not doing poorer. I did not sign up to hold your hand while you cry over sold-off summer homes and canceled country club memberships." My breath hitched. "What about us?" He laughed, a short, ugly sound that echoed in the cavernous room. "There is no us without the Vance shipping money. Let's be brutally honest for once in our miserable lives. Did you really think a man like me would tolerate your boring charity, galas, your endless anxiety, your complete lack of ambition if there wasn't a 9-figure trust fund attached to it?" The words struck me with physical force. My knees went weak, and I had to lean against the doorframe to stay upright. My chest tightened, a vice gripping my ribs so hard I couldn't draw a full breath. He was rewriting our entire history in front of my eyes. Every anniversary dinner, every kissed forehead, every whispered, "I love you," in the dark. All of it had been a calculated transaction, a performance for an audience of one. "You never loved me," I stated. "It wasn't a question. I loved the life you provided," Richard replied smoothly, zipping his duffel bag with absolute finality. And to my credit, I played the devoted husband perfectly. I earned every penny of the lifestyle I enjoyed. But the well is dry, Ellie. And I'm not thirsty enough to stick around. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number, putting it on speaker as he grabbed his camel hair coat. "Sarah," he said the moment the line connected. His voice had instantly shifted back to the commanding, authoritative tone of an executive. "Yes, Mr. Sterling," his young blonde assistant answered. Her voice was suspiciously breathy for 7:30 in the morning. "Change of plans. The Vance accounts just went under. Liquidate my private offshore holdings immediately and wire them to the Cayman account. And pack a bag. We're going to Miami earlier than expected." "Oh, finally," Sarah giggled. "I'll be ready in 20. He hung up, not even bothering to look at my reaction. He had a private offshore holding. He had Sarah. He had been planning an exit strategy while I was picking out new linens for our 10th anniversary trip. "You've been stealing from me," I said, my voice eerily calm despite the violent shaking of my hands. "You've been siphoning my money into your own accounts." "I call it a management fee," Richard sneered, walking toward the bedroom door. He paused right next to me, his expensive cologne suddenly smelling like rot and ash. "Don't bother calling your lawyers, Eleanor. If the feds have frozen your assets, you can't afford them anyway. You have nothing. You are nothing without that account balance." He didn't look back. He strode down the hallway, the wheels of his leather suitcase gliding smoothly over the imported marble. The heavy oak front door opened and then slammed shut with a sickening thud. The echo reverberated through the massive penthouse, followed by a silence so absolute it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. I was alone. My legs gave out. I sank to the cold floor, the chill seeping through my silk robe and into my bones. I didn't scream. I didn't sob. The shock was too profound for tears. It was a visceral bodily failure. My stomach contracted violently, and I pressed my hand to my mouth, gagging on the bile rising in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, but all I could see was the absolute disgust in his eyes when he looked at me. Asterisk, you are nothing. For the first 36 years of my life, I had been insulated by wealth. It was a fortress that kept the harshness of the world at bay. But Richard had just proven that the fortress was made of glass, and he had shattered it from the inside out. I had given him my heart, my trust, and my absolute devotion, and he had viewed it all as a business expense. I sat on the floor for what felt like hours, though the grandfather clock in the study told me it had only been 20 minutes. The walls of the penthouse, with their priceless art and custom moldings, began to close in on me. The air felt thin, recycled, dead. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a crime scene, a monument to my own foolishness and blind trust. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't breathe in the scent of his cologne still lingering in the air. I needed to move. I needed to get out. My hands trembling, I pulled myself up from the floor. I walked into the closet, now half empty and violatingly bare on his side, and pulled on the first pair of jeans and a cashmere sweater I could find. I didn't bother with makeup. I shoved my feet into a pair of loafers, grabbed my purse, and walked out the door. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to escape the suffocating silence of the elite world that had just chewed me up and spit me out. I pressed the button for the elevator, watching the numbers tick down. I was descending from the penthouse, falling from the sky, about to crash into a reality I was completely unprepared for. The high-speed elevator descended 70 floors in less than a minute, but my stomach felt like it had been left at the top. The mirrored walls of the cab reflected a woman I barely recognized. Pale, hollow-eyed, stripping away the polished veneer I had spent a lifetime perfecting. When the silver doors slid open with a soft chime, the grand lobby of the Pinnacle greeted me. It was a cavernous space of imported marble crystal chandeliers and the hushed, expensive murmurs of Chicago's elite starting their day. I walked toward the concierge desk, my legs feeling like lead. I needed a car. I needed to get to my lawyer's office, or maybe a hotel. Anywhere but here. Jean-Paul, the chief concierge, who usually greeted me with a deferential bow and a bright smile, was typing at his terminal. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling," he said, though his eyes darted nervously to his monitor. "Good morning, Jean-Paul. I need the house car, please. I need to go to the Four Seasons. You can bill it to the penthouse account." Jean-Paul hesitated, his fingers freezing over the keyboard. A slight uncomfortable flush crept up his neck. "Mrs. Sterling. I apologize, but Mr. Sterling called down just 10 minutes ago. He left strict instructions that the penthouse account is no longer authorized for discretionary charges." My chest tightened. Richard hadn't just packed his bags. He was actively dismantling my life on his way out. "Fine," I said, my voice trembling slightly. I reached into my purse, retrieving my Platinum Amex. Put it on my personal card. He took the heavy metal card, swiped it, and waited. A sharp negative beep echoed from the machine. Jean-Paul winced. "Declined, ma'am." Try this one." I handed him a Visa Black card. Asterisk beep. Asterisk declined. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. I handed him another, and another. Every single card accounts I had held since college had been frozen or canceled. Richard's wealth manager must have executed a complete financial lockdown the second Richard gave the order. "Mrs. Sterling?" Jean-Paul whispered, leaning in close. His deferential tone was gone, replaced by the thinly veiled pity the working class reserves for the newly fallen rich. All of them are coming back inactive. Sir requested that your key fob be deactivated as well pending the restructuring. He was locking me out. I was standing in the lobby of a building my trust fund had paid to secure, and I was entirely homeless and penniless. Is there a problem here? The voice belonged to Mrs. Vanderburg, a board member of the Homeowners Association and the most vicious gossip in the Gold Coast. She had paused on her way to the revolving doors, her designer poodle clutched under one arm, her eyes sharp and glittering with predatory curiosity. Two other residents, a hedge fund manager and his wife, stopped their conversation to look over. "No problem, Beatrice," I tried to say, but my voice cracked. My hands were shaking so violently that my purse slipped from my grasp. It hit the marble floor with a heavy clatter. My phone, my useless credit cards, a tube of lipstick, and a bottle of anxiety medication spilled out, sliding across the polished floor for everyone to see. I dropped to my knees, scrambling to gather my things. The humiliation was absolute. The lobby went dead silent save for the clicking of my nails against the stone as I frantically tried to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. I couldn't breathe. The air in the lobby felt heavy, sucking the oxygen from my lungs. My vision blurred with unshed tears. I looked up for a fraction of a second. Mrs. Vanderburg wasn't helping. Jean-Paul wasn't coming out from behind his desk. They were just watching. To them, I was no longer a neighbor. I was a spectacle, a cautionary tale. Then a shadow fell over me. A pair of heavy scuffed steel-toed work boots stepped firmly into my line of sight, planting themselves between me and Mrs. Vanderburg's piercing gaze. I heard the rustle of heavy canvas fabric as a large frame knelt beside me on the cold marble floor. A dark, calloused hand, large-scarred and infinitely steady, reached out and gently picked up my scattered cards. "Take a breath, ma'am," a low, deep voice rumbled. It was a voice anchored in reality, completely devoid of the artificial pitch of the wealthy world. "I've got this." I blinked through my tears and looked up. It was Marcus Hayes. He didn't look at me with pity. He didn't look at me with judgment. He looked at me with the quiet, urgent focus of a man assessing a crisis. He gathered my spilled items with efficient, respectful movements, placing them back into my bag. Then he stood up to his full height 6'3" of solid working-class muscle and turned his broad back to me, effectively shielding my breakdown from the rest of the lobby. "Show's over, folks," Marcus said. He didn't yell, but the sheer, unyielding authority in his voice made the words crack like a whip. "Nothing to see here. Have a good morning." Mrs. Vanderburg bristled, offended that the maintenance man dared to address her so directly. "Excuse me, Mr. Hayes, I said have a good morning, Mrs. Vanderburg." Marcus interrupted, his tone polite but entirely immovable. He stared her down until she huffed, turned on her designer heel, and walked out the door. The other residents quickly scattered, suddenly finding their phones very interesting. Marcus turned back to me. He offered me his hand. His palm was rough-dusted with drywall powder and grease, but as I placed my trembling, manicured fingers into it, it was the safest thing I had ever felt. He pulled me up effortlessly. "You shouldn't be out here right now," he said softly, his dark eyes scanning my pale face. "Come with me. Let's get you out of the spotlight." I couldn't speak. I just nodded. Without waiting for permission from Jean-Paul, Marcus gently took my elbow. He didn't lead me toward the grand front doors. Instead, he guided me away from the chandeliers, away from the judgmental stairs, and toward the heavy, unmarked metal door that led to the service corridors, the hidden world beneath the marble cage. The heavy metal door clicked shut behind us, completely cutting off the soft classical music and the whispering judgments of the lobby. Instantly, the atmosphere changed. The air down here in the service corridors smelled entirely different. A mix of industrial cleaner, hot water pipes, and damp concrete. There were no chandeliers, only the steady pale hum of fluorescent tube lights lining the ceiling. For the first time in my life, I felt profoundly grateful for the gray, unpolished concrete. Down here, there were no mirrors. There was no one to perform for. Marcus walked slightly ahead of me, his broad shoulders easily navigating the narrow hallway. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand an explanation for why the wealthy Mrs. Sterling was suddenly weeping on the floor like a broken doll. He He just offered a quiet, protective presence, a physical barrier between me and the world that had just collapsed. "In here," he said softly, pushing open a scarred wooden door marked * maintenance office *. I stepped inside. The room was small, deeply utilitarian, and overwhelmingly warm. A small electric space heater glowed bright orange in the corner, fighting off the basement chill. The walls were lined with metal shelving holding tools, PVC pipes, and rolled-up blueprints of the building's infrastructure. In the center of the room was a battered metal desk covered in work orders, and next to it, a small folding table. Sitting at that folding table with a box of crayons spread out before her was Maya. She looked up as we entered, her dark eyes wide with quiet curiosity. She was wearing a neatly pressed navy blue school uniform, her hair braided perfectly with tiny pink beads at the ends. She didn't look scared, just observant. "Daddy?" she asked, her small voice cutting through the heavy silence of the room. "It's okay, baby girl." Marcus said, his voice dropping into that incredibly gentle register I had heard earlier. "Mrs. Sterling is just having a rough morning. We're going to let her sit down for a minute." He pulled out a rolling office chair, the vinyl cracked and taped at the edges, and gestured for me to sit. I collapsed into it. The adrenaline that had carried me out of the penthouse and down the elevator was rapidly evaporating, leaving behind a violent bone-deep tremor. My teeth began to chatter, my shoulders shaking uncontrollably. I crossed my arms tightly over my chest, trying to hold my fracturing pieces together. Marcus watched me for a split second, his jaw tightening. Without a word, he reached for the heavy, fleece-lined canvas work jacket hanging on the back of his chair. He walked over and gently draped it over my shoulders. "Put this on," he murmured. "Shock makes the blood run cold. You need to get your core temperature up." I pulled the heavy fabric around me. It swallowed me whole, falling past my knees. It smelled like sawdust engine oil and a cheap, clean laundry detergent. It was the most comforting scent I had ever inhaled. It smelled like hard work. It smelled like a man who actually built things, rather than tearing them down for profit. I buried my face in the collar and closed my eyes, letting the coarse texture ground me. I don't know how long I sat there, just breathing, trying to stop the tears from silently spilling over my lashes. The room was completely quiet, save for the ticking of the heater and the soft scratch of Maya's crayons against paper. Marcus had retreated to the other side of the room, turning his back to give me privacy while he pretended to sort through a box of brass fittings. He was guarding my dignity when I had none left to defend. Then I felt a tiny tentative tap on my knee. I opened my eyes. Maya was standing right in front of me. Up close, I could see that she had her father's solemn, intelligent eyes. She wasn't looking at my expensive loafers or my designer sweater. She was looking straight at my tear-stained face. In her small brown hands, she held out a little cardboard box of apple juice with a plastic straw meticulously attached to the side, along with a perfectly folded, slightly rough paper towel. "Are you sad?" she asked. Her voice wasn't pitying, it was purely factual, the way only a child can ask a devastating question. I swallowed hard, my throat aching. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm very sad today." Maya nodded slowly as if this made perfect sense. She stepped closer and pressed the juice box into my trembling hands. "My daddy says that when the world gets too heavy, you have to sit down and have some sugar. It makes the shaking stop." She gently placed the folded paper towel on my knee. "And this is for your eyes. You're ruining your pretty eyelashes." The dam broke. It wasn't a loud, hysterical sob. It was a quiet, profound weeping. I had spent 8 years married to a man who controlled millions of dollars. A man who wouldn't cross the room to hand me a tissue unless it benefited him. And here in a concrete basement, a 7-year-old girl with a scuffed backpack was offering me her school snack to fix my broken heart. "Thank you, Maya," I choked out, clutching the small juice box like it was a lifeline. "Thank you so much." Maya patted my knee, a gesture of ancient maternal comfort. "You're welcome. You can stay in our fort as long as you want. It's safe down here." I looked up over Maya's head and met Marcus's gaze. He was watching us, his posture relaxed, but incredibly alert. He didn't smile, but the look in his eyes was one of deep, unspoken understanding. He nodded once, a silent promise that for right now, in this small, cluttered room, I was protected. The penthouse 70 floors above me was gone. The money was frozen. The marriage was dead. But sitting in a cracked vinyl chair, wrapped in a janitor's coat and drinking a little girl's apple juice, I realized something terrifying and beautiful. I had lost everything, but for the first time in my life, I felt completely safe. The small cardboard juice box was empty, the plastic straw bent and crushed between my trembling fingers. I sat in the cracked vinyl chair, the heavy canvas of Marcus's work jacket wrapping me in a cocoon of warmth that slowly stopped the violent shaking in my shoulders. Marcus moved quietly around the small office. He didn't hover, and he didn't ask me to explain the spectacle in the lobby. He simply allowed me the space to fall apart and piece myself back together without an audience. He opened a battered red Coleman cooler resting on a metal shelf and pulled out a thermos and a foil-wrapped package. He unscrewed the thermos, the scent of strong dark roast coffee immediately filling the room. Not the artisanal $40 a bag espresso Richard imported, but the thick, honest smell of a corner diner. He poured it into a heavy ceramic mug that had Chicago Bears fading on the side and set it on the desk in front of me right next to the foil package. Egg and cheese on a hard roll. Marcus said, his voice a low, steady rumble. He unwrapped the foil, revealing a halved sandwich. He slid one half toward me on a paper napkin. It's not the breakfast you're used to, ma'am, but you need something solid in your stomach. Shock burns calories fast. I looked down at the sandwich, then up at him. You don't have to share your breakfast with me, Mr. Hayes. I've intruded enough. It's Marcus, he corrected, gently pulling up a metal stool and sitting down opposite me. He handed the other half of the sandwich to Maya, who took it with both hands. And down here, nobody goes hungry if I can help it. Eat. I picked up the sandwich. My manicured hands, pale and trembling, looked absurd holding the greasy foil. I took a small bite. It was warm, salty, and utterly grounding. It tasted like survival. As I chewed, I watched them. Mornings in the penthouse had been exercises in walking on eggshells. Richard demanded absolute silence while he scrolled through the global market reports on his tablet. If I clinked my silver spoon against my porcelain bowl too loudly, he would let out a sharp, exasperated sigh, punishing me with his cold silence for the rest of the day. He viewed breakfast not as a shared meal, but as a time to mentally calculate his next acquisition. Here in this cramped basement office, the air was entirely different. Marcus wasn't looking at a screen. He was looking at his daughter. He reached over with a large, calloused hand, dark skin dusted with a faint layer of drywall powder, and gently wiped a crumb from the corner of Maya's mouth with his thumb. You finish your math homework last night, Maya? He asked. Yes, Daddy, she mumbled around a mouthful of egg. But fractions are stupid. Why do I have to cut the pie into 8 pieces if it's just you and me eating it? Marcus chuckled a deep, rich sound that vibrated in the small room. Because someday, baby girl, you're going to have a big table with a lot of people at it, and you need to know how to make sure everybody gets their fair share. My throat tightened. Asterisk, make sure everybody gets their fair share. My husband, a man who managed billions, had just frozen my accounts and stolen my private funds to run away with his assistant. He had taken the whole pie and left me the empty plate. Yet this man, making an hourly wage to fix the plumbing in a building he could never afford to live in, was teaching his daughter about equity and generosity. The contrast was so sharp it physically hurt. Is the lady going to stay here? Maya asked suddenly, pointing a small finger at me. It's not polite to point, Maya. Marcus gently corrected her, though his eyes met mine, offering a silent question. I don't know where I'm going to go. I admitted the raw truth, slipping out before my pride could stop it. My husband locked me out of our accounts. My keys are deactivated. I don't have anywhere to be right now. Saying it out loud should have felt humiliating, but in front of Marcus it didn't. There was no judgment in his dark eyes, only a quiet, factual acceptance of my reality. You're welcome to stay in here for the morning, Marcus said evenly, taking a sip of his own coffee from the thermos cap. Nobody from upstairs comes down to the maintenance level unless a pipe bursts. It's safe. Maya's school bus picks her up in 15 minutes. After that, I have to do my rounds, but the door locks from the inside. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You saw how those people looked at me upstairs. I'm a mess. I'm nobody today. Marcus set his cup down. He looked at me, really looked at me, seeing past the expensive silk sweater and the tear-streaked face. Because a man who abandons his wife in the middle of the lobby is a coward. Marcus said, his tone flat hard and entirely devoid of hesitation. And I don't care how much money is in your bank account, Eleanor. Nobody deserves to be treated like trash. He called me Eleanor, not Mrs. Sterling, not Ellie, the infantilizing nickname Richard used to diminish me. Eleanor. He said it with a weight and a dignity that made me sit a little straighter. He stood up towering in the small room and picked up his tool belt from the desk. The heavy leather and steel clanked together the sound of a man preparing to carry the weight of his world on his shoulders. "Finish your coffee, Eleanor," he said softly. "You can figure out the rest of your life in a couple of hours. Right now, just breathe." As he turned to help Maya put on her small winter coat, I pulled his canvas jacket tighter around my shoulders. The scent of motor oil and clean laundry enveloped me again. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since my alarm went off at 6:00 a.m., my heart stopped racing. For the next 2 hours, the maintenance office was my entire world. The heavy steel door remained closed, keeping the frantic, money-driven panic of my old life firmly on the outside. I sat in the cracked vinyl chair, still wrapped in Marcus's oversized work jacket, listening to the rhythmic hum of the building's massive boilers, vibrating through the concrete floor. I needed to gather myself. I needed to call my attorney Vivian and formulate a plan. But before I could do any of that, I wanted to clean up the small mess I had made on Marcus's desk. I reached over to throw away the crumpled foil from the sandwich and Maya's empty juice box. As I leaned across the battered metal desk, my sleeve caught the edge of an overstuffed manila folder, resting precariously on top of a filing cabinet. It slipped, hitting the floor with a heavy slap. Papers spilled out, fanning across the gray concrete. "Oh no," I whispered, immediately dropping to my knees to gather them. I didn't mean to pry. I was simply trying to stack the papers back into a neat pile. But as my hands brushed over the documents, the bold red lettering at the top of the pages caught my eye. They weren't building blueprints or maintenance invoices. They were medical bills. Dozens of them. Asterisk Chicago Memorial Hospital. Department of Oncology. Asterisk patient Nia Hayes. Asterisk status deceased. Asterisk outstanding balance $142, 450.00. Asterisk. My hands froze. I sat back on my heels, staring at the crisp, unforgiving hospital letterhead. Beneath the massive hospital bill were notices from collection agencies carefully organized by date. But what struck me most wasn't the staggering amount of debt. It was the handwritten ledger Marcus had clipped to the inside of the folder. Every Friday, like clockwork, there was a record of a payment. Sometimes it was $300. Sometimes it was just $50. But week after week, month after month, this man was painstakingly chipping away at a mountain of medical debt for a wife who was already gone. I held the papers in my trembling hands, my mind struggling to process the sheer weight of what I was looking at. Just 3 hours ago, my husband, a man who managed billions of dollars, who wore custom Italian suits and drank vintage scotch, had literally sprinted out the door the second he thought my accounts had hit zero. He had abandoned me, his wife of 8 years, to protect his offshore assets. He had chosen money over his vows, without a fraction of a second's hesitation. And here was Marcus, a working-class black man, raising a little girl entirely on his own, making an hourly wage to unclog the pipes of the wealthy. When tragedy had hit him, when the woman he loved had fallen ill, he hadn't run. He had stayed. He had fought. And even now, with her gone, he was still carrying her weight, working his fingers to the bone to honor her memory and pay her debts. He was drowning, yet he had still offered me half of his breakfast. He had shielded me from the mocking eyes of my own neighbors. The lock on the door clicked. I gasped hastily, trying to shove the papers back into the folder. Marcus stepped into the room, a heavy toolbox in one hand. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me on the floor, surrounded by the spilled contents of his most private struggles. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room. The air grew tense. I expected him to be angry. He had every right to yell at me to kick me out of his sanctuary for violating his privacy. "Marcus, I am so sorry," I stammered frantically, gathering the last of the envelopes. I knocked the folder over by accident. I wasn't snooping, I swear. Marcus set his toolbox down. His face was unreadable, a mask of practiced stoicism. He walked over, knelt down beside me, and gently took the folder from my hands. "It's fine, Eleanor," he said quietly. His voice didn't hold an ounce of anger, only a profound, bone-deep weariness. He tapped the folder against the floor to straighten the pages, then placed it back on the desk. Cancer doesn't care much for privacy or bank accounts. I slowly stood up, my legs still shaky. Your wife, Anania. He provided the name softly, his dark eyes fixed on the manila folder. She passed away 3 years ago, fought for 2 years before that. The insurance company fought back harder. But the debt, I said, my voice barely a whisper, the contrast between my world and his tearing at my throat. It's enormous, Marcus. How are you managing this alone? He looked at me then. The sheer quiet dignity in his posture made me feel incredibly small. I'm managing because I made a vow, Marcus said simply, as if the concept was the most natural thing in the world. For better or for worse, in sickness and in health, when you love someone, Eleanor, you don't stop taking care of them just because it gets hard. You don't stop just because they're gone. It's not a debt to me. It's my responsibility to my family. Tears hot and fast welled in my eyes again, but this time they weren't for myself. They were for the breathtaking beauty of his character. I was a woman who had spent my life surrounded by billionaires, but standing in this dusty basement looking at a man in a faded utility shirt. I realized I had never actually met a rich man until today. Marcus pulled a battered leather wallet from his back pocket. He took out a $20 bill and held it out to me. I called a buddy of mine, he said, shifting back to practical matters. He drives a cab. He's waiting by the loading dock out back. No cameras, no doormen. He'll take you wherever you need to go, and nobody upstairs will know. I stared at the $20 bill. It was probably a fraction of his grocery budget. Marcus, I can't take your money. I saw the bills. I know what you're dealing with. He stepped closer and gently, with a commanding tenderness that left no room for argument, placed the bill into my hand and folded my fingers over it. Today you need a ride, he said softly. Tomorrow you can fight your battles. Take the money, Eleanor. Let me help you out the door. 72 hours later, the storm of my life had been meticulously contained within the sleek mahogany-paneled conference room of my attorney, Vivian. The zero balance alert had been a trap, a flawless stress test designed by my wealth manager to flush out Richard's hidden offshore accounts. It worked perfectly. While Richard was busy booking flights to Miami with his assistant thinking he had escaped a sinking ship, Vivian was legally freezing every single dime of his embezzled funds. I had my money back. I had a luxury hotel suite overlooking Lake Michigan. I had my power. But as I sat on the edge of a pristine, king-sized hotel bed, I didn't feel powerful. I felt incredibly hollow, surrounded by expensive room service and high thread count sheets. The only thing in the room that actually felt real was the heavy canvas work jacket draped over the back of a chair. I had had it professionally dry cleaned, though I had secretly asked them not to use anything too heavily perfumed. I didn't want to erase the scent of sawdust and honest labor. It was Friday afternoon. Outside, a cold, relentless Chicago rain was washing the city gray. I looked at the clock. 2:45 p.m. I didn't call my driver. I borrowed Vivian's unassuming gray sedan and drove toward the south side, navigating away from the towering glass skyscrapers and into a neighborhood lined with brick walk-ups and corner bodegas. I pulled up across the street from a public elementary school just as the final bell rang. Through the rhythmic sweeping of the windshield wipers, I watched the chaotic sea of children spilling out of the double doors. And then I saw them. Marcus was standing near the chain-link fence. He was wearing a different work shirt today, gray instead of blue, but his posture was the same, a solid, immovable anchor in the middle of a rushing tide. He held a large black umbrella. When Maya ran out, her pink backpack bouncing, he immediately stepped forward, angling the umbrella entirely over her small frame. The freezing rain soaked his own shoulders in seconds, but he didn't flinch. He just smiled, taking her hand. A protector. It hit me again, that sharp visceral ache in my chest. I grabbed the folded jacket, and an envelope stepped out into the rain and crossed the street. Maya spotted me first. She stopped dead in her tracks, pulling on her father's hand. "Daddy, look! It's the lady from the fort." Marcus turned. His eyes widened slightly in surprise as he took in my presence. I was wearing a simple trench coat and flats, a far cry from the devastated woman trembling in his basement 3 days ago, but the rain was already flattening my hair. "Eleanor?" he asked, his deep voice cutting through the noise of the traffic and the rain. He immediately shifted the umbrella to cover me, leaving himself completely exposed to the downpour. "Hi, Marcus. Hi, Maya," I said, my voice shaking just a little, though not from the cold. I held out the jacket. "I wanted to return this, and the $20. I can't thank you enough for Tuesday." Marcus looked at the jacket, then at me. His gaze was piercing, stripped of any deference to my wealth. He saw the fatigue in my eyes, the lingering shadows of a broken marriage. "You drove all the way across town in the rain to return a coat. I needed to see you." I admitted the truth, slipping out before my guarded high society instincts could stop it. "I needed to see someone real." Maya didn't care about the heavy, unspoken tension between us. She stepped forward and grabbed my free hand. Her small fingers were warm. "Did you fix your sad eyes?" she asked, her gaze lifting to mine with terrifying, innocent clarity. "I'm working on it, sweetheart," I whispered, squeezing her hand gently. "Good," Maya declared firmly, "because Daddy said I got an A on my spelling test, so we are going to Mel's Diner for hot chocolate. You have to come. Daddy says you still need sugar when the world is heavy." Marcus cleared his throat, a subtle flush darkening his cheeks. He looked at me, giving me a polite, unspoken out. "You don't have to do that, Eleanor. I'm sure you have a lot of important things to get back to. Mel's isn't exactly the kind of place you're used to." I looked down at Maya's hopeful face, then up at Marcus's wet shoulders and steady, guarded eyes. The penthouse was empty. The luxury hotel was cold. My old world was a museum of lies. "I would love nothing more than a cup of hot chocolate," I said softly. Mel's Diner was 3 blocks away. It smelled of fried onions, old coffee, and wet raincoats. The vinyl booths were patched with duct tape, and the neon sign in the window buzzed loudly. To Richard, this place would have been an insult. To me, it felt like a sanctuary. We slid into a booth, Maya sitting directly next to me, effectively pinning me to the wall. The waitress, an older woman named Patty, came over, immediately dropping a menu in front of Marcus with a familiar smile. "Hey, Marcus, the usual and extra whipped cream for the spelling bee champ." "You know it, Patty. And a coffee for the lady, please," Marcus said. As Maya began animatedly telling me about the difference between there and there, I watched Marcus. He listened to his daughter with complete, undivided attention. He didn't check his phone. He didn't scan the room to see who was looking at him. He was entirely beautifully present. "My mom used to make hot chocolate with 2 marshmallows, Maya said suddenly, her tone dropping into a matter-of-fact sadness. "Daddy only does 1, but he's trying his best to learn how she did it." My breath hitched. I looked at Marcus. His eyes held a flash of raw, unfiltered grief, but he didn't look away from his daughter. He just placed a large hand over her small one. "I'm still practicing, baby girl. I'll get it right eventually." In that worn diner booth, listening to a widowed father admit his flaws while desperately trying to keep his daughter's world intact, my heart finally broke open. Not from the betrayal of my past, but from the overwhelming beauty of this present. Richard had spent 8 years learning how to exploit me. Marcus was spending his life learning how to love the people in his care. The hot chocolate arrived. Maya pushed her mug toward me. "You take the first sip," she instructed. "It heals the broken parts." I took a sip. It was overly sweet, slightly burnt, and absolutely perfect. I looked at Marcus, and for the first time in months, a genuine, unforced smile touched my lips. He saw it, and the corner of his mouth twitched upward in return. By Monday morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a cold, blinding clarity. I sat in the executive conference room of Vivian's law firm, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that felt like armor. My hair was pulled back into a severe twist, my posture flawless. I was no longer the shattered, trembling wife, weeping on a marble floor. I was Eleanor Vance Sterling, the sole heir to a shipping empire, and I was holding the detonator. At exactly 10:00 a.m., the heavy oak doors swung open. Richard walked in. He looked exactly as he always did. Impeccably groomed, wearing a navy Tom Ford suit, a confident smirk playing on his lips. He had a slight tan, likely from the weekend in Miami with Sarah, right before the reality of his situation had begun to set in. He sat down across from me, not bothering to greet Vivian, who was watching him with the terrifying stillness of a predator, waiting for the prey to take the final step. "Look, Eleanor, Richard started smoothly adjusting his platinum cuffs. I'm a reasonable man. I know you're hurting, and I know your family's trust collapsed. I don't want to leave you destitute. I'm willing to offer you a modest monthly stipend until you can find a job. Maybe as a receptionist somewhere. Just sign the expedited divorce papers so we can part ways cleanly. I didn't speak. I simply looked at Vivian. Vivian smiled a sharp, bloodless expression and slid a single manila folder across the polished mahogany table. Mr. Sterling, I suggest you read the first page before you continue your generous offer. Richard rolled his eyes, opened the folder, and scanned the document. I watched the exact moment his world imploded. The smirk melted off his face. His jaw went slack. The artificial tan seemed to drain from his skin, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. He was looking at the authenticated, legally binding summary of the Vance Family Trust. Asterisk total liquid assets, $148, 500,000.00. Status fully active, secure. This, Richard stammered his eyes, darting frantically across the page as his hands began to tremble. This is impossible. I saw the alert. The margin called the zero balance was a honeypot, Vivian said smoothly, interlacing her fingers. A fabricated digital stress test designed by Eleanor's wealth manager with my legal oversight. We suspected you were attempting to siphon marital funds into private offshore accounts. We needed you to believe the money was gone, so you would panic and execute the wire transfers, thereby leaving a digital paper trail of your embezzlement. And you fell for it in less than 3 minutes, I said, my voice eerily calm, ringing clearly in the silent room. You didn't even ask to call the bank, Richard. You just packed your watches and ran. Richard dropped the paper. He looked at me with wide, desperate eyes. The polished, commanding executive was gone. In his place was a terrified, greedy coward who had just realized he had slit his own throat. Ollie, he breathed, leaning forward, his voice suddenly thick with manufactured emotion. Ellie, baby, you have to understand, I panicked. The stress of the firm, the market. I wasn't thinking straight. I was trying to secure whatever I could asterisk for us asterisk. Sarah was just... She was a mistake. A momentary lapse in judgment. Sarah left you at the Fontainebleau Hotel the minute your credit cards were declined on Saturday morning, Vivian interjected coolly. We know. We've had a private investigator tracking your movements since Thursday. Richard flinched as if he had been physically struck. He looked back at me, his eyes pleading, tears welling up. Eleanor, 8 years. We built a life. I love you. I'm sorry. I'll do anything, therapy, counseling, whatever you want. Just, please, don't do this to us. You don't love me, Richard, I said, feeling absolutely nothing for the man crying across the table. You love the zeros in that account. When you thought they were gone, I became nothing to you. You told me I was nothing. I was angry, he shouted, his desperation suddenly curdling into venom as he realized begging wasn't working. And what about you, playing the victim while you're slumming it behind my back? My eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Richard sneered, leaning back in his chair, trying desperately to reclaim some semblance of power. My PI isn't bad either, Eleanor. He told me where you went on Friday afternoon. The South Side. A filthy little diner with asterisk him asterisk. He spat the word out with absolute visceral disgust. Marcus Hayes. The building's maintenance guy. A black janitor with a kid. The temperature in the room plummeted. Vivian's pen stopped moving. You locked me out of my home, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous razor-sharp whisper. You left me crying on the lobby floor for everyone to see. And Marcus Hayes stepped between me and the people who were laughing at me. He put his own coat on my back. He fed me. He treated me with more respect in 5 minutes than you have in 8 years. He's a nobody, Richard exploded, slamming his fist on the table. He fixes toilets, you're the heir to the Vance fortune, and you're letting some working-class charity case play hero. You think he wants you for anything other than your money? He didn't know who I was, I replied. Standing up slowly, I towered over him, radiating an icy, unshakable fury. He thought I was broke. He thought I had nothing, and he still gave me his last $20 so I could get to safety. You thought I was broke, and you threw me away. I picked up my purse, looking down at him one last time. Sign the papers, Richard. If you fight this, Vivian will hand over the embezzlement files to the federal prosecutor, and you will go to prison. You are leaving this marriage with exactly what you brought into it, nothing. Richard stared at me, his face twisted in a mask of pure hatred and humiliated rage. He realized the door was closed. He had lost everything, but the venom in his eyes told me he wasn't going to disappear quietly. "This isn't over, Eleanor," he hissed, standing up abruptly. "I'm not going to let you humiliate me. I'll make sure everyone in that building knows exactly what kind of trash you're associating with. I'll destroy him." He turned and stormed out of the conference room. I stood perfectly still, my heart pounding not with fear, but with a fierce protective instinct I had never felt before. Richard wasn't going home. He was going to the Pinnacle. He was going after Marcus. I told Vivian to call building security, but I knew I couldn't wait for them to handle it. I grabbed my keys, practically running to the elevator. The drive from the law office to the Pinnacle usually took 15 minutes. I made it in 8, ignoring 2 yellow lights. I threw my keys to the startled valet, didn't wait for my ticket, and pushed through the heavy revolving doors of the lobby. The scene inside was pure, unadulterated chaos. Richard was standing in the center of the grand marble floor, his face flushed red with unhinged fury. A small crowd of residents, including Mrs. Vanderburg and the hedge fund manager from last week, had gathered, drawn by the spectacle of one of their own losing his mind. Standing opposite Richard, calm and entirely immovable, was Marcus. He was wearing his dark gray maintenance uniform, a heavy pipe wrench held loosely in one hand at his side. He didn't look intimidated. He didn't look angry. He looked like a mountain watching a storm throw itself against the rocks. "Oh, you think you're smart, don't you?" Richard was shouting, his voice echoing harshly off the crystal chandeliers. He pointed a shaking finger at Marcus's chest. "You think because you gave my wife a cup of cheap coffee, she's going to pull you out of the gutter? You're a glorified janitor, Hayes. You unclog my toilets. You are nothing. You're just a charity case she's using to get back at me." Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't step back. He looked down at Richard with a profound, terrifying pity that only a truly strong man can hold for a weak one. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus rumbled gently, his voice deep and steady, "I think you need to lower your voice. You're embarrassing yourself." "Embarrassing myself?" Richard let out a hysterical, ugly laugh. He turned to the crowd, seeking validation from his wealthy peers playing on their worst prejudices. "This man is a predator." He saw a vulnerable, wealthy woman and sank his claws in. "He's a parasite trying to climb out of the basement by sleeping with his betters." "That is enough, Richard." My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the lobby like a blade of ice. Every head turned. I walked across the marble floor, the sharp asterisk click, click, click asterisk of my heels the only sound in the room. I didn't stop until I was standing directly between Richard and Marcus, physically shielding the man who had shielded me days prior. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked only at the man who had tormented me for 8 years. "Eleanor," Richard sneered, though I saw the momentary panic flash in his eyes. He tried to puff out his chest. "Coming to rescue your handyman." "I'm coming to clean up my mess," I said coldly. I turned my head slightly, catching the eye of Frank, the head of building security, who was hovering nervously nearby. "Frank, Mr. Sterling is no longer a resident of this building. His key fob has been deactivated, and his name has been removed from the penthouse deed. He is trespassing." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Mrs. Vanderburg clutched her poodle, her jaw dropping. Richard's face drained of color. "You can't do this. I'm on the HOA board." "You were on the board because you represented my trust," I corrected him, my voice carrying to every corner of the lobby, so there would be no misunderstandings. "But since you attempted to embezzle millions of dollars into an offshore account to fund your affair with your assistant and failed, you have absolutely no assets, no power, and no right to be here." The silence was absolute. The wealthy elite of Chicago are a vicious crowd. They smell blood in the water. Instantly, the gaze of the crowd shifted from Marcus to Richard. They weren't looking at him as an equal anymore. They were looking at a fraud, a criminal, a broke, desperate man who had been caught. "Ellie, don't," Richard whispered, his bravado finally shattering. He realized what I was doing. I was stripping him of the only thing he actually cared about, his social standing. The humiliation was public, absolute, and terminal. "Frank," I repeated, my tone entirely flat. Escort this man off the premises. If he resists, call the police and have him arrested for trespassing. And Richard, if you ever speak to Mr. Hayes like that again, or if you come anywhere near his daughter, I will personally see to it that my legal team buries you so deep you will never see daylight. Frank, a retired police officer who had always respected Marcus, didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and grabbed Richard firmly by the arm. "Let's go, Sterling. You heard the lady." Richard tried to pull away, looking wildly at the residents, the people he had played golf with, the men he had drank scotch with. "Beatrice, John, tell her," but Mrs. Vanderburg turned her back, adjusting her silk scarf. The hedge fund manager suddenly found his phone incredibly interesting. The elite had banished him. Richard Sterling was dragged out of the revolving doors, kicking and shouting, until he was unceremoniously dumped onto the wet Chicago pavement outside. I stood there for a moment, my chest heaving, the adrenaline slowly ebbing from my veins. I turned to face the crowd of wealthy spectators. "The show is over," I said, echoing the exact words Marcus had used to protect me. The residents quickly scattered, retreating to the elevators in hushed, scandalized whispers. When the lobby was finally empty, I turned to Marcus. He was still standing there, his posture relaxed. He looked at me, taking in the tailored suit, the flawless makeup, the raw power I had just wielded. "I'm so sorry, Marcus," I whispered, my icy facade dropping instantly. "You didn't deserve to be spoken to like that. I am so sorry I brought that to your door." Marcus looked at the revolving doors, then back at me. He didn't look intimidated by my wealth. He didn't look ashamed of his uniform. He just gave me a slow, quiet nod of deep, genuine respect. "You didn't need my coat today, Eleanor," he said softly, a hint of pride in his deep voice. "You did just fine on your own." 6 months. That was how long it took to dismantle a life built on lies and construct one anchored in truth. I never stepped foot in the Pinnacle again after the day Richard was escorted out. I sold the penthouse with all its imported Italian marble and crystal chandeliers to the highest bidder. Vivian finalized the divorce with lethal efficiency. Richard was left with exactly nothing, eventually taking a mid-level management job in another state, entirely banished from the elite circles he had worshipped. But my real victory wasn't destroying Richard. It was finding my way here. I pulled my unassuming sedan to the curb of a quiet, tree-lined street on the south side. The autumn air was crisp, biting at my cheeks as I stepped out, but I didn't feel the cold. I walked up the concrete steps of a modest 2-story brick triplex. Above the door, a single yellow porch light glowed warmly against the Chicago night, casting a soft golden circle on the welcome mat. I knocked twice. The door opened, and there was Marcus. He wasn't wearing his maintenance uniform anymore. He had on a simple faded black Henley that stretched across his broad shoulders and a pair of worn denim jeans. He smiled, that slow, deep, devastatingly gentle smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "You're right on time," he said, stepping back to let me in. I walked into the apartment, immediately enveloped by the smell of roasted chicken garlic and fresh baked rolls. The space was small, the furniture second-hand, but it was alive. There were Maya's vibrant crayon drawings held to the refrigerator with mismatched magnets. There were thick woven throw blankets on the couch. It was a home, a real breathing home. "Eleanor?" Maya came running from the hallway, her pink beads clacking together. She threw her arms around my waist, burying her face in my sweater. I dropped my purse and hugged her back tightly, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Hi, sweet girl," I whispered, kissing the top of her head. "Did you finish your science project?" "Daddy helped me glue the solar system," she announced proudly, pulling back to look at me. "He said Pluto isn't a real planet anymore, but I put it in anyway because nobody deserves to be left out." I looked up at Marcus over her head, my heart expanding so rapidly it physically ached. "No," I agreed softly, meeting his dark, steady gaze. "Nobody deserves to be left out." Dinner was a messy, loud, and beautiful affair. We sat around a small wooden table that Marcus had sanded and refinished himself. There were no rigid rules of etiquette, no silent judgments about which fork to use, and no checking the stock market on a tablet. There was just Maya's endless chatter about school, Marcus's deep, rumbling laughter, and a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. I realized, sitting there with a paper napkin on my lap, that I had never been wealthier than I was in this exact moment. After Maya had been tucked into bed, thoroughly exhausted, and clutching her favorite stuffed elephant, Marcus and I stepped out onto the small back porch. The city buzzed faintly in the distance, but back here under the flickering porch light, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. Marcus leaned against the wooden railing, holding 2 mugs of tea. He handed me one. Our fingers brushed the rough calluses of his hands, a stark grounding contrast to my skin. "I went to the hospital billing department this morning," Marcus said quietly, staring out at the small patch of yard. I held my breath, gripping the warm ceramic mug. Over the past 6 months, as our friendship had slowly, carefully blossomed into something infinitely deeper, I had offered to pay Nia's medical debt 12 times. Every time Marcus had gently but firmly refused. He needed to carry that weight himself. He needed to finish what he started. "And?" I asked softly. He turned his head, looking at me. The heavy, invisible burden he had carried on his shoulders since the day I met him was gone. He stood taller, lighter. "I made the last payment, Eleanor. It's done. She's at peace and the slate is clean." Tears pricked my eyes. I reached out, placing my hand flat against his chest, feeling the steady, strong rhythm of his heart beneath the cotton shirt. "I am so incredibly proud of you, Marcus Hayes." He covered my hand with his own. The protective distance he had always maintained between us, the invisible boundary of class of race of a man afraid to drag a woman into his struggles, finally dissolved completely. "I spent 3 years thinking my life was just about surviving," he murmured, stepping closer. The heat radiating from his large frame chased away the autumn chill. "I thought my heart was entirely closed for renovations." And then a woman in a $1,000 coat sat in my basement, wearing my dirty work jacket, crying into my daughter's apple juice. I let out a wet, breathless laugh. "I was a disaster." "You were real," he corrected, gently reaching up to tuck a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His touch was so incredibly tender, it made my knees weak. "You showed me that you don't need a marble floor to stand your ground. You're the bravest woman I know, Eleanor." "You saved my life, Marcus," I whispered, looking up into the eyes of the man who had caught me when the world let me fall. "You and Maya, you gave me back my heart." He didn't say another word. He just leaned down, wrapping his large, strong arms around my waist and pulled me against him. When his lips met mine, it wasn't a spark. It was a hearth fire. It was warm, steady, and built to last the winter. I closed my eyes, sinking into his embrace under the yellow porch light, finally truly safely home. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Which moment softened your heart the most? Do you believe more in late regret or in the power of deep healing? Can a child truly change an adult's heart? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know where you are watching from. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe for more emotional journeys. Thank you for being part of our community.